In our previous lecture, we talked about population growth and we looked at the characteristic growth curve you will see. Today we're going to talk about the factors which will affect population size. So we've got the graph here for some logistic growth, so this S-shaped curve, and we talked about the three phases you had. So you have lag, the rapid growth, and then you'll get to the stable phase during the carrying, which is the carrying capacity of this particular ecosystem. And factors that affect the size of this population and the carrying capacity of an ecosystem can be split into abiotic. Remember, that's non-living factors that affect population size. So wind, temperature, water quality, natural disasters, such as floods, also biotic factors, so living factors. And what we're going to talk about today, food supply, competition is important, and we've got two types. We've got inter-specific and intra-specific competition, and I'll talk about the differences between those two types of competition. We have predators. They are going to affect population size, and things like parasites and diseases in a population will also affect population size. So what we're going to do is look at these factors in turn and illustrate the ideas with some examples. Abiotic factors are an important limit to population growth. What we know is that if abiotic conditions are very harsh, so if it's very cold or very dry, something like that, only a few species will actually grow and survive there. And when there's only a few species, there's going to be low competition between these species. So, for example, if we think about the harsh environment of the Arctic and the Arctic Circle, and we think about a polar bear, polar bears are the apex predator. So this means they are the top predator in the Arctic. So they will eat the seals, the fish, they are the top predator. There's no competition for what a polar bear does. So polar bear is the top of the food chain. In a milder environment, for example, where the lions live, lots of competition for resources. So lion will be competing with things like hyenas for the food. So milder conditions with milder abiotic factors, more competition and a greater variety of species. Harsh environments with very challenging abiotic conditions, you will have fewer species, so less competition. It's not just about overall environments either. The seasons will also affect organism population size. So here we've got spring, summer, autumn and winter, and we've got the population size for whatever organism this is that is higher in the summer and the autumn than it is, and then falls in the spring and the winter. So in the warmer weather, there's more reproduction, so the conditions are better, so the population increases. Colder weather, conditions are less ideal for this animal, less reproduction, the population decreases. And you can get this cycle in population size related to the seasons. So this is some real data looking at the seasonal effect of abiotic factors on population size on a population of mosquitoes. And then spot Rochelle's mistake. Here, my goodness, I haven't italicized my species name. That is one of my pet peeves in science. I can't believe I have not done that. I apologize. Press pause on the video to look at this data in more information. But what this data is, and you've got the link to the journal down here if you want to read it like I did, is that the abiotic factors have a really important effect on the mosquito population. So if we look at the data in 2011, we've got links between rainfall and population size. When there's lots of rain, so this is the lots of rain section here, there's an increase in population. So you can see this correlation between rainfall and size of population for mosquitoes. And that's because the mosquitoes breed in the water. So when there's more rainfall, there's more standing water around, so there's more places for them to breed, so there's an increase in their population size. And then when the water dries up, there's not as many places to reproduce, so the population falls. Biotic factors will affect population size as well, and we'll focus first on food supply. So when there's lots of food, there is an increase in population. When there's less food, there's a decrease in population. When there's less food, it's not just that the organisms are starving and dying, but also if you've got less food, you're less likely to be able to get pregnant and support a healthy pregnancy. So population size will be down because birth rate will be down as well. This data here is from an island in Alaska, and in this island in Alaska, red deer were put on the island. And when the red deer were put on the island, you've got the classic growth curve we were talking about. So you've got lag, exponential growth, and then you've got the stable, followed by the death phase. And that's because they ate all the food on the island. So they go to the island, there's lots of food to begin with, loads of food, population of deer increases, the deer eat the food, and eventually the vegetation is so low, there's no food for the deer, and so the deer die out. So the land was overgrazed. So too many deer on the island ate all the vegetation, so exceeded not just the carrying capacity, but broke their environment as well. So the environment was destroyed, so the deer had no food, so the population plummeted. It's a bit depressing, isn't it? Another biotic factor that can affect population size is competition. We've got two types of competition. We're going to start with interspecific competition. And with interspecific competition, it's competition between different species. Okay, so that's kind of the key idea here. And they are going to be competing for resources. So food, space, water, nutrients, partners, not partners, that would be a terrible one if they're different species, but they are competing for all these resources. And what will happen in this case is that one species will win. So one species will be the champion. And you can see this even in the lab. So you can see this in the lab using this species that you can see in the corner here. This is a paramecium. So it's a single-celled ciliate. And we've got the data down here. We've got two different species of paramecium. And bottom left-hand corner, if they are grown separately, so you've got two flasks of these two different species, you see the classic growth curve for both species. So you see the lag, the rapid growth, they reach the carrying capacity all nicely when they are grown separately. However, if you put the two species together, what happens is one species, this species here, will have the normal growth curve and outcompetes and beats the other species. So the other species, the paramecium, starts to have an increase in population size and then is outcompeted and dies out. So one species beats the other. So in this case, the champion is this paramecium who wins and takes all the food and the nutrients and beats the other species of paramecium. My favorite example of interspecific competition is the competition between these two species. So cute. So we have two different species here. So we have this species. I'm going to get my Latin names right now. So this is the red squirrel. We've got the red squirrel here. And the grey squirrel, same genus, but different species name. And this is the grey squirrel. Now, these two squirrels are different species. So remember that definition of a species. They can't mate and produce viable, fertile offspring. Now, in the UK at the moment, red squirrel, there are about 140,000 red squirrel in the UK. Not everywhere, only in special places. Grey squirrel, when you come to the UK, or if you're in the UK now, you will see them everywhere. There are about 2.5 million grey squirrel in the UK. And the red squirrel is the native species. So this is the species that was in the UK to begin with. So native to the UK, they're quite selective about what they'll eat. So they have a selective diet. They like pine kernels, quite selective, nice and native to the UK. The grey squirrel are the invaders. So they were first introduced in 1876, and some people brought them over from America. Brought over about on 30 different occasions. So 30 different occasions they brought some grey squirrels over because they thought it would be nice to add a little bit of variety to the colours of species in the UK, colours of squirrels in the UK. It is now illegal in the UK to release grey squirrels into the wild. Grey squirrels got here, and they are actually better adapted to living in the UK than the native species. So they eat a wide diet. So the red squirrel likes pine kernels, grey squirrel likes acorns as well. Grey squirrel brought with it and is resistant to a virus called squirrel pox. You can't make this stuff up. So this is the squirrel pox virus, and it's resistant to it, so it doesn't die. It's got a natural immunity to the squirrel pox virus. Unfortunately, the red squirrel, when it gets squirrel pox brought over by the grey squirrel, it's fatal. So we end up with this problem that not only are the grey squirrels eating more food, therefore they can grow and reproduce faster, and they are spreading, and when they live in an area the grey squirrel can't. You've also got this squirrel pox issue as well. Grey squirrels damage the trees in the UK as well, so there's lots of work on trying to limit the number of grey squirrels in the country compared to the number of red squirrels. This data here, and you can get more information on this at the link at the bottom as well, shows you the numbers of red and grey squirrels in the UK. So we've got data from 1945, 2000 and 2010. Red is where there's red squirrels. So hopefully you can see that in 1945, lots more places where there were red squirrels than there are now in the UK. Grey squirrels are in grey on the map, which seems nice and sensible. And again, the grey population has spread across more areas of the planet, of the UK. We do have some areas shown in orange where we have both grey and red squirrels, and where we have both grey and red squirrels, the grey squirrels and red squirrels are in interspecific competition, and the grey squirrels will win in that competition because they're better adapted to their environment, and also they have this immunity against the squirrel pox virus. So places where the orange are on this map are areas where we're trying to protect the red squirrel. And we're also trying to stop the grey squirrel getting into areas that have. We don't want the grey squirrels to get where the red squirrels are. Various different ways that we're trying to limit grey squirrels. So they can be trapped and shot, and I'm sure John will tell you more about this because he is one of the people who shoot the grey squirrels. They're also trying to come up with more humane ways to kill the grey squirrels, or to not kill them, to limit their fertility. So it's just been approved that we're going to start giving grey squirrels in areas where grey and red squirrels are together, we're going to start giving them a contraceptive so that they are not as fertile, so they have less grey squirrel babies. So what you do is you put the contraceptive in here, squirrel goes in and eats it. When you want to see if your squirrels have been eating it, you add a mark into the food that has the contraceptive in it for a chemical called rhodamine B. So you kind of mix the contraceptive in with a nut paste plus this rhodamine B, and it makes a fluorescent red colour if a squirrel's eaten it. So then you can shine your UV light, and if your squirrels look red, you know that they've taken and eaten the oral contraceptive, which seems very weird. The way at the moment as well, this is not in widespread use yet, if you see any grey squirrels, then you call the numbers in the areas and they'll send someone out to, like John, to deal with the grey squirrels. I'm sure he'll tell you more about that if you ask him. Intra-specific competition is much more significant than inter-specific competition. This is competition within the same species. So it's the same species, and this means that they are competing, they're in the same niche. So they perform the same function in the ecosystem, they eat the same food, they need the same resources. So much more significant, and it tends to stabilize the population size, because if the population gets too high, then there's competition and the population falls, and then there's less competition for resources, the population increases, and it tends to kind of stable the population at a good level. So not too high, not too low, just at the right level. An example of intra-specific competition between the same species is the red deer rut. And this is where the male deer show kind of aggressive behavior so that one of them will outcompete and get to mate with the female deer. It's a ritualistic fight. You don't have to have a fight to the death, but the deer that is the most aggressive has the deepest noise as it's fighting. Can't believe I've just done you an impression of a deer. Wins the battle and gets to reproduce with other lady deer. So this is an example of like a ritual fight. You don't have to have a fight to the death, but it's an example of intra-specific competition. The squirrel story gets more complicated. So we had our red squirrel and we have our grey squirrel, and they are different species. So as they're different species, that is an example of inter-specific. So that's the red and the grey squirrel. And I said that the grey squirrel is out competing the red squirrel. What we now have in the UK, I've yet to see one. They've not got up this close north, which is a good thing. We now have squirrel that look like this. Still pretty cute. And these are the same species. So this grey and black squirrel are the same species. So they're showing intra-specific competition. Same species. They have got a mutation in the gene for melanin, so they have a darker skin color, fur color. And at the moment in the UK, there's about 25,000 of them in the south. But ecologists are watching them very carefully because there's some evidence that the squirrel with the mutation in the pigment gene is even more competitive to the red squirrel than the grey squirrel would be. So it's even stronger. So yeah, watching those squirrels and how this particular mutation passes through the population will be really, really interesting as well over the coming years. Predators are organisms which eat prey. So prey equals the food. Predators are what eat the food. And there's a cyclical relationship in predator-prey population size. When there is more prey, there's a slight time delay, and then there's an increase in predator levels. As the predator levels increase, they start to eat the prey, and the prey levels fall, and then the predators have no food, and then they fall as well. So you have this relationship, the cyclical relationship. When there's an increase in predators, this causes more prey to be eaten, so prey declines. When there's less prey, then that leads to less food for predators, so you have less predators. But then you go back to less predators means more prey, and it goes on and on and on and on with a cyclical arrangement. We can see some real data for this. Now, I have spent far too much time looking at this data, and I'm going to provide a link to this data for you. And this whole study is I think it's absolutely fascinating. So this is looking at the population of moose and wolf on this island, which is in Lake Superior in North America, and fourth largest lake island in the world. So it's in Michigan in the US. And ecologists have been there for 60 years, decades, studying wolf and moose populations. Wolves eat the moose. So the wolves are the predators, and the moose are the food, or the prey, we should say. And you can look at this cyclical relationship. So as the moose levels increase, then there's an increase in the predator population as well. Now, this is real data. It's not as beautiful and smooth a data as you would expect, but it's beautiful, real data. And this population, or these two populations of moose and wolf, have been very closely studied. And what the really interesting website says is that in 2018, there were actually only 2 wolves left on the island. So this data is not shown here. Only 2 wolves left on the island. Now, that's not enough wolves to actually survive. And the wolf population had plummeted because another wolf had managed to get across 15 miles of ice to get to the lake, and this alpha wolf had arrived and killed everybody else. So that's competition within the same species. And so what the ecologists have decided to do, and what they did, is they added more wolves to the island to try and stabilize the wolf population. Because if the moose level increased too much, then that would ruin the island, because then the moose eat all the vegetation. So it's a really fascinating website that you can spend many hours on, like me, looking at wolf and moose population, and you can listen to the cries of the wolf, and it's absolutely fantastic. The last factor to mention is the effects of diseases and parasites on populations. So parasites live on a host or in a host, and they have to make sure they don't kill their host. So if the parasite levels increase too much, what you end up with doing is that the parasite populations will come in and adversely affect the host that they're living in and cause the death of the host. So you have this relationship between what lives in an organism has to live in it, but not live too much so it kills it. So again, parasites, disease as well, viral diseases like the squirrel pox passing through the squirrel population all act to limit population growth. Thank you.